So now I'm having to deal with that, along with everything else, with the mother and the drug addiction, and then the committing the suicide, and then which even that was, and I say it on camera, questionable. I'd already been through that, and not that I didn't want to, not that I wanted to die. I just wanted, not that I want, I didn't want to reset anymore. You know, I said if I stay here, there's a very good chance that could happen. They say one of the greatest life hacks you can do is to move away from your hometown. And so one of the things that made me decide I was never coming back to Pensacola to live, and keep in mind, my friends and my family that are there, I love them to death, I do, and I love them dearly, never coming back to live, is I had a friend of mine that called me, and now with the cell phones, you have the hearing aid mode, where you can go onto your telephones and stuff like that, so I'm talking to him and stuff like that, and as I'm talking to him, his voice starts to get more drawn out, and it starts to get more, hey, yeah, I know. I'm like, hey, bro, are you stoned? And he goes, no, I'm not stoned, I'm not stoned. And I know that when he's on things, he was one of those guys, I know that there's telltale signs you can tell that somebody's on drugs or drunk or whatever. And one of his telltale signs is he repeats himself over and over and over again. And then I'm talking to him, no, not stoned, not stoned, not stoned. I'm like, all right, bro, I mean, you already told me that. Yeah, not stoned, not stoned, not stoned. And I'm like, then what are you? High as hell, brother, high as hell. While he was on the phone with me, he was shooting up. And he was one of my closest friends. And I was like, nah, I'm not coming back to this. Which, at the time, I thought I was making the most horrible decision, because now I felt like I was abandoning my daughter. And I was like, but then it was kind of like, if I stay, my daughter won't have a dad to be around anymore. Because it's a matter of time. One or the other is going to get. It's going to happen. I was like, nah, I'm out. So, of course, that led to a lot of problems that I wish I could have fixed or something, but yeah, it just didn't, and it led to a lot of problems, it really did. But in a weird way, I'm glad I'm alive to have seen them, because otherwise it just would not have, it just was not going to happen. So we go back to Orlando, not going to Pensacola at all. I have a son that's born, at this time, it's about, no, he was born a couple of years before, he was born in 2005. And then things are going along. So we're living in Orlando, and this is around 2007-ish, 8-ish, somewhere around there. But at that time, my grandfather has Alzheimer's. So my abuelo. So he has Alzheimer's. And so I was talking to my mom, and there was a couple places that we were going to think of moving into, just to try to get out and start a life for us as a family, right? And I was hoping that I could get my daughter. Was a lot of pipe dreams going on at the time. And so then she tells me about, my grandfather, and I'd seen my grandfather, and it was touch and go. So we decided that we were going to move to Palm Bay. It was still close enough to Orlando that my ex-wife could still help out with the grandmother and stuff like that. And it was also close enough that if I needed to make a quick flight to Pensacola for whatever reason, I could, just out of MCO, fly into Pensacola. So we made the move to Palm Bay. And it was interesting. I went from making all this money on iDrive, not a superstar waiter, but people knew who I was. People, especially on the Strip, they knew who I was. And at that time, and I know this sounds a little off subject here, but while I was in Orlando, one of the things that made us kind of go to elevating towards moving to Palm Bay was, when I was in Orlando, something had happened. And one of the things that had happened with me my whole life was I always had this, my heart was always just, it never seemed to catch a rhythm, ever. And it was always like something was going to happen. And I always felt like something was going to happen, but it never did. So I always thought, well, maybe it's anxiety. Maybe it's stress. Maybe they're hand in hand. I don't know. Maybe, I kept coming up with all these maybes. Well, man of the house, I've got to take care of my family, right? So what do? I do whatever I can. I make all the money I can. My ex-wife at the time, she was a stay-at-home mom. So I ended up working 3 jobs. I worked at Red Lobster on I Drive, one of the busiest in the nation. And then I worked at a place called Salt Island, which was one of the busiest fine dining restaurants in the nation as well, on I Drive. And I worked at a place called Bennigan's. Bennigan's was my quick cash. I knew I could get in and out, cash, easy, right? I was working 3 jobs. She was staying at home. One morning I wake up and again, I get that feeling like something's about to happen. I don't know. And of course, every time I thought that, it never did. So I'm getting dressed for work and I'm working 3 jobs. So I would work double. And usually I had Sundays off. Sundays were my day to spend with the family. And so I was working. And so I get up and I'm getting dressed and I start to feel lightheaded. I'm like, man, I'm working too much. I looked at the clock and I realized I was up a little bit earlier than usual. I went in the living room, said hey to my son, said hey to my ex-wife, I was like, I just gotta go back to bed. And so I did. And so I went back to bed. And then she came in and woke me up, and I woke up and I went and I was finishing putting my clothes on, and then I started to feel, and I don't know what the hell happened, but it was like in 1 second, boom, dropped. I dropped, and then, but it was kind of like I passed out, but I remember watching the whole thing, but it happened so quickly that it was almost like there was no series of events. It was just boom, boom. Like, it was just weird. I get up and I go out and I tell my ex-wife, I'm like, look, I gotta go to the hospital. Something is definitely wrong. Because now at this point, my heart is not just beating weird. Now it feels like it's straining. I was like, nah, I can't do this. So her brother takes me to the hospital. And I'm in the hospital and they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And I've been complaining about this for years. Like, I can't understand what it is. It just always feels like this, and it's just years and years. And here I am in the hospital, and they're like basically treating me like a hypochondriac because I have a medical history, right? So I'm like, no, the cops come in my room. Now, but a little kind of throw back to my earlier years. When I got arrested the last time I got arrested for doing the stupid stuff that I did, I got into an altercation with the cops. And what had happened was, they knew of me and they knew that I was kind of a punk, and so the way they handled me was not with care. And I wasn't fighting, I wasn't doing any of that stuff, but they made sure that I knew I was the one in cuffs, and I was basically at the beck and call. I was at their mercy, I was at the whim, I remember at one point putting me into the cop car. They were pushing me into the cop car as the door was barely open, which I don't even understand what the point of that was. But as the door was barely opened, they're pushing me into the cop car at the same time. Now, I'm taller, and then they yank the cuffs. They yank them up, so I headbutted the cop car. I headbutted the cop car, immediately pissed off. So as I'm like this, I turned around, things happened, So now I'm in the hospital. And now the cops are in my room. Flashback. And I was like, okay, y'all want to go? Let's go. I'm not leaving until somebody tells me what's going on. I don't care if you're going to take me. You're going to have a hard time with it, and it ain't going to be easy. So at that time, a doctor named Dr. LaFrane, I believe he was the head of cardiology for Sand Lake Hospital in Orlando, Florida. If I said it wrong, I apologize. Most of the time I hear it was off, but I think it's Dr. LaFrane. He comes by and he goes, hey, listen, and there's all this commotion going on. He goes, listen, I'm the head of this, blah, blah, blah. If I take a look and everything's fine, would you please go willingly? I said, so you're the top guy. I'm the top guy. If I can't find it, then I'll send you to somebody, but come on, please. I said, all right. So he goes through, they're doing these tests. Probably 30, 45 minutes later. And then all of a sudden I hear, there it is. Like, what? What had happened was, in my heart, and the reason why nobody was catching it, which again, nobody's to blame in this, it's just things happen in life. So what was happening was, so you have valves, you have tricuspid and you have bicuspid, right? So tricuspid opens like this, bicuspid opens like this, right? So what was happening was my valves were switched. So I had a valve that was opening like this, but not closing. So what was happening is, what happens when you have things that are pressurized and one side's open? The pressure starts to get a little wonky, right? So the blood starts mixing, things start getting weird, which also explains why I would have trouble focusing. It would always feel like I was about to go to sleep but never did. All those things, now there was an explanation for it. So I ended up having open heart surgery. That was an ordeal in itself. I mean, but true to self, I said, you know what, I'm going to bounce out of this, and I did. And I did it fast. I did it way faster than I should have. They told me to take it easy. That I did not. So I went back to work, did the whole thing, going through it. But during the time that I was in open heart surgery, what did they give you? Pain meds, right? So, and then I was like, you know what? I could start to feel the grip on me. And I was like, no, I'm done. Not going to happen. So, and the way I kind of got out of that was I threw myself back into work. And so I figured, well, I can't do this while I'm doing that. And even if I could, wouldn't be a good idea. It affects my money, all this other stuff. So that's what I did. And I threw myself back in my work. Wrong idea. Bad idea. And then hit me again. Not in the same thing that happened to begin with, but then I ended up having medical problems as a result of that. And then the doctor's telling me, we told you not to. You did anyways. And I looked at him, like, you going to pay my bills? Are you going to pay my bills? No, you're not. So who is? Yeah, answer me that. So, but then it started to come, and one of the things that people don't understand is that when you're, with the pills and the drinking and all that other stuff, when you stop, you feel like you've lost your friend. And you feel like you've lost your best friend sometimes. And it's like, you fall into this, I don't want to say like, a depression. Because now you feel like somebody died. And that's the closest feeling I can say. So then I started going to these kind of weird places, right? Now getting back to, we moved to Palm Bay. So this is where I'm at. Now, I didn't discuss much of this with my ex-wife because I thought, as a man, you got to do man things. Nobody cares about your whining. Nobody cares about your complaining. You just got to do man things. And the way you do man things is you provide. So quit your bitching, go provide. So that's what I did. So we moved to Palm Bay, and I got transferred. Everything's going great. Life is good. We bought a house, our first home, and everything was just hitting on all cylinders. And the economy started to kind of get, for most of you remember what that whole housing implosion was. Yeah, so we had just bought our house at the height of that. And so as time went on and things happened, my head, it was just getting to the point where it was just kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how much longer I can keep it. And it was so draining. It was so draining. So draining. And I can only imagine how I was with my ex-wife. And there were a lot of ways that I could have been better, but I wasn't. And it's just what it was. And then around that time also, my second son was born. So now I've got 3 kids. And so this was now going into 2010. So 2010, we moved from that house. We ended up losing that house. And we moved into another house, to be closer to my grandfather. But my grandfather's Alzheimer's was way too gone. He, at one point, didn't even know who I was. He was from Cuba, of course, so he spoke Spanish. Well, now he was not speaking any English at all, even though I could talk with him frequently. Now he wasn't speaking any English at all. And not only that, there were a lot of times when I would go over to his house and I would have to knock on the door, and I would have to open the door, and then I would have to go to his room because he would be stuck sitting there at the edge of his bed, not knowing what he was supposed to do next. So he would just wake up and just sit there, So one time I walked in there, I was like, hey, abuelo, blah, blah, blah. Didn't know who I was, and he thought I was coming to hurt him. I don't know if you've ever experienced the strength of a man who thinks he's about to lose his life. That's what I had to deal with. And then my mom kind of took things from there, and she was able to take a handle on that. But so he ended up leaving. So now I'm there. And then I just started kind of tumbling through things. it's just one thing after another, and I'm trying to deal with what's going on in my head. And again, in the way that I acted, in the way that I chose to be, keeping silent because I thought that's what you had to do. And it's definitely started to take a toll on the marriage for sure. And then, and then with the kids and the upbringing, and I've always been honest with my kids and all the things that I've done. And I've never shied away from it because number one, I don't want them hearing from somebody else and then me having to explain. Or number two, if they hear from somebody else and I'm not around to explain, other people are going to make their own choice. So let me tell you what the truth is, because then I don't have anything to remember. I'll just tell you how it was. So I'm going through all this, and in a way that was kind of therapeutic for me. But also in another way, it caused a little bit of a rift within the families because it was kind of like you can't be so open. You can't do it. And I started questioning why. Why can't you? Why can't you just say, hey, you know what? When I was younger, I did something really stupid. Here's what I did, and here's what you should not do. And on top of that, if you ever find yourself in this situation, here's how you fix it. Why not? Because then what's going to happen is all these kids are going to fumble through life screwing up and then being scared to tell mom and dad because they're perfect over here. It's just kind of like, nah. So that was going on. And after a while, then we got a phone call. And I know I'm kind of fast forwarding through it a little bit, but we got a phone call. And then that phone call was, so my daughter's mom had succumbed to drug addiction, and she'd been battling for years. And my ex-wife and I, we offered her, we talked to other people, we had a situation in which we could have had her move in for 6 months, and she would not have to pay anything, just come down with the kids, just get away from all that. Then she was wanting to leave the situation she was in up there. She'd been trying for I don't know how many years, and it just never happened. And I thought, well, if I do this, here's my shot, right? I can have my daughter in the picture, and this is my shot, like how to rebuild things with her. But then sadly, right before she was, and I mean days. That's what the difference in this was. Days. Somehow she felt a little funny one night, and then she hit the skids again. And I'm not saying anybody doped her up or anything like that. I'm saying if you told me, I believe it. But in any case, she hit the skids again. And so I was like, this is going to be nowhere. Now, one of the things that I was having to battle as a dad was, so my daughter's living in Pensacola, and I'm living in Palm Bay. And throughout the whole time, the state was so unforgiving. And what I mean by that is, I would try to find out what my daughter was. So, her mom was on her own journey, we'll call it. So I would try to find out what my daughter was because I wouldn't hear from her for months. The state would tell me it's not your business. You're not the custodial parent. So therefore, you have no right to know. So I would talk to the families and stuff, and people would tell me, oh yeah, she's doing good, oh yeah, this, and oh yeah, that, and they would always give me updates. Weren't sure. Which kind of fed back into, in hindsight, was one of the things that kind of made me start to just get that again. And as time went on, things got worse that I didn't know, and yet I'm still trying to find out little things like, where's my daughter? So even when I went up there were 2 times I would go up to Pensacola to visit. And there were a few times when I'm like, yo, can somebody just grab her for me, please? Like somebody? And her grandmother would. So I'd go over to her grandmother's every now and then, but then even then there were times when she was like, I don't know. So then I started feeling in a way that it was kind of like, are they trying to keep it from me? Or do they just generally not know? Or what are they trying to hide? It was one of those 3 things in my head. And later on I find out it was all of them. Because if I had found out what was going on, then I would have had a reason to take her and move down with me, have her move down with me to Palm Bay, and then I would have taken her away from the whole family. Which isn't what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be a village. I wanted everybody to be involved. I just didn't want to be omitted from it. So one day, my ex-wife and I are sitting on a beach, and I believe it was Memorial Day, if I'm not mistaken, May 25th. And so we got the phone call, Julie's dead. I was friends with Julie, and I called her Jewel. And I was friends with her. And it's one of those things when you watch somebody going through those things, you can walk away. And then whatever happens, happens. It's not your responsibility. But what do you do when you can't walk away? She has my daughter. So it's not like I can just cut her off. It's not like I can just say, hey, this is done, we're done, whatever. I don't ever have to see you again. No. So what ends up happening is you vicariously, or maybe not, vicariously might not be the best word, but you end up finding yourself in a way kind of living parallel to other people's lives like that and watching it. And every now and then you would get the phone call and it would just be like, hey, how are you? Well, do you want to talk to your daughter? And then the phone goes dead or whatever, and it's from a private number. You can't get the number. I mean, it was just a nod, just the head games. So we get the phone call. Julie's dead. And then we get and then I'm trying to wrap my head around what's going on. And it was just a weird place to be. So then I'm like, I gotta get my daughter. I have to. So, not for or against anybody, but I got my daughter. But what I was not aware of was at the time when I got my daughter, all that she had been through. Now I'm dealing with a daughter who sees me a certain way as if I'm the cause and I'm the reason for a lot of these things that have happened in her life. Nor can I blame her for thinking that, because what else would she know? It's not like she's 40 years old and looking back at life and going, this makes sense. She's still in it. So now I'm having to deal with that along with everything else, with the mother and the drug addiction, and then the committing the suicide, and then which even that was, and I say it on camera, questionable. But it's just all those types of things, and the turmoil and the chaos that came with it. Again, not her fault, but when you have that in the mix of other things going on that have nothing to do with her, everything just starts to kind of become its own storm. And then it started to become a perfect storm, because you had what I was dealing with, you had my ex-wife dealing what she was dealing with, and then now you have my daughter, and then now you got my two boys that are now getting thrown into this as well. And then on top of that, the grandparents, and it was just like this crazy, just crazy. And it's one of those moments where I thought about running. I did. And it wasn't because I wanted to run and leave anybody hanging. It's because I felt like there were times when I felt like if I ran, then I would come back and things would be different. That maybe I was the problem. And I'll admit that I was part of the problem, because everybody's got a part to play. But it was just one of those deals where it was just kind of like, it's got to change. This has to change, and it didn't. It got worse, actually. And part of the problem was that with our daughter, I was dealing with a situation I'd never dealt with before. So then we tried to do counseling and stuff like that. And with the counseling, it was hit or miss. And there were some great counselors, in my opinion. There were some great counselors. But just because you're a great counselor doesn't mean you're what the person needs at the moment. And again, not taking away from anybody that was involved with it, but it's just kind of like, do you need something sweet? Do you need something sour? Do you need something salty? What do you need? And it's got to be the right place at the right time, right? Well, then my ex-wife and I started on the rocks, and shortly thereafter, probably 2-3 years, we were on the outs. So, and in all this time, I was also trying to do things like find God again, trying to find some semblance of what was going on in this world. And it wasn't because the world was horrible. It was because I felt a lack of control. And not that I wanted to control everything, but I wanted to control the chaos enough for everybody to be cool, everybody to be good. And then everybody could just do whatever they wanted, and it would be from a good place. So, and I know it sounds kind of childish to think of that, but when you're under the chaos, when you're under all that stuff, you start to revolt. It's one of the things that I had to be conscious of later on in order to fix and say, we can't be doing that again. Because what happens is when you revert and you start to get back into your childish ways of thinking of, I can make everything okay, even though it's not your responsibility, or even if it is, it doesn't mean that you can, and you have to be okay with that. Sometimes emotionally you start to act that way as well. And that was one of the problems that I was having, was it was kind of now I was being split into 7 different people. Not that I had multiple personality disorder or anything like that, but it was almost like I had to feel like I had to put out 7 fires constantly. And it was just exhausting. And again, nobody's fault. Nobody's fault. And if I could, I would do it again to try to make it, I would do it differently. But I would still try to help, and I would still try to save. Unfortunately, the ways that I tried to help and save, they didn't help or save. And they actually made things worse. It was trial and error, and I screwed up a lot. And there were times that, with my ex-wife and my daughter, there were times when I could have handled situations way better, and I didn't. I didn't know any better for most of it, and then there was some times when I was just fed up with it, and I was just like, you know what, screw you, But then as time goes on, so I have my 2 boys, and Jordan, and Rod, and that's wife has left. So now I'm forced to kind of find myself, and I had to do it, and it was hard. It was hard. So what I did was I said, okay, now I have to find my happiness. Now I cannot blame anybody. Not that there was anybody to blame, but now I cannot blame anybody because it's me. I am sitting on this couch. There's nobody here. Why am I feeling the way I feel? And a lot of people are going to say, oh, because you're on the couch with your ex-wife, my now ex-wife, this and this, and look at this, and people that were in it saw what was in it, and they were like, brother, how else would you be? I mean, like, almost like it was excusing me, and not that they were excusing me, but it wasn't helping me either. So I said, you know what? I'm going to have to sit here, and I'm going to have to figure me out. So that's what I did. And in the process, and it was kind of a long journey, but in the process, a lot of things happened. And one of the things that happened was I found myself starting to gravitate towards those same people I should not have gravitated towards. But this time I caught it. This time I caught it. Now, 3 decades later, no matter, I caught it. So then that said, to me, there's hope. So now I'm in this, I'm working at a fine dining restaurant, and I'm around good people who have also been through the same types of life experiences that I've been through and come out of it. So now I'm around people who have solved their problems, maybe not all of them, but some of them at least, and some of the same ones that I had. So it was a very benefit situation for me, and I still talk to them now. They're still part of like the family. I hold them very near and dear to me. And so I was going through all that, and then I started finding myself becoming more at peace. So my smile started to come back for no reason. It was just smile. It's a good day. I started to find those kinds of things, and it's kind of a funny thing when you're in life and you're in the trenches. All you see is the trenches, and you hear the warfare going on, and you see the trenches. And after a while, you start to think that's all there is, right? And the clouds are always gray. It's always raining. It's always storming. It's always these. But then one day, the sun's out, and you don't hear any warfare, and you find yourself on a beach. And it's kind of like, oh, wait a minute. That moment, you have to hold it. You have to catch it. And that's what I did. And I did it more and more and more. And part of the thing was I had to let go of feeling guilty that because when you look back at life, there's a lot of things that you think you could have done differently, and you feel bad for it.
Even though you didn't know you could have done things differently at that time, now you do, you feel bad for it as if you could somehow have done things differently. But you didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. And until then, that's just the way life gives you. So I had to shake the guilt for my marriage failing, for me failing my kids, for just nonstop. You failed. And I started to realize